Rhetoric, Poetics and Poetry. Poetics is the attempt to account for literary effects by describing the conventions and reading operations that make them possible. Poetics is closely associated to rhetoric. Rhetoric has been the study of the persuasive and expressive resources of language. Aristotle separated rhetoric from poetics, treating rhetoric as the art of persuasion and poetics as the art of imitation or representation. Medieval and Renaissance traditions assimilated poetics and rhetoric. Rhetoric became the art of eloquence, and poetry was a superior instance of this art. In the 19th century, rhetoric was seen as artifice divorced from the genuine activities of poetic imagination. In late 20th century, rhetoric has been revived as the story of the structuring powers of discourse. Poetry is related to rhetoric. Poetry is language that makes abundant use of figures of speech and language that aims to be powerfully persuasive. Rhetoric figures. Rhetorical figure is defined as the alteration of ordinary usage. Rhetoricians formerly attempted to distinguish specific tropes which turn or alter the meaning of a word. Recent theory rarely distinguishes figure from trope and has even questioned the notion of an ordinary or literal meaning from which figures or tropes swerve. Derrida in White Mythology shows how theoretical accounts of metaphor seem inevitably to rely on metaphors. Tropes and figures are fundamental structures of language. A metaphor treats something as something else. Metaphor is a version of a basic way of knowing. We know something by seeing it as something. Metaphor has been treated as basic to language and the imagination because it is cognitively respectable, not inherently frivolous or ornamental. For Roman Jakobson, metaphor and metonymy are the two fundamental structures of language. If metaphor links by means of similarity, metonymy links by means of contiguity. Metonymy moves from one thing to another that is contiguous with it, as when we say the crown for the queen. Metonymy produces order by linking things in spatial and temporal series, moving from one thing to another within a given domain, rather than linking one domain to another, as metaphor can do. Other theorists add synecdoche and irony to complete a list of four master tropes. Synecdoche is the substitution of part for whole, 10 hands for 10 workers. It infers qualities of the whole from those of a part and allows parts to represent wholes. Irony juxtaposes appearance and reality. What happens is the opposite of what is expected. These four master tropes, metaphor, metonymy, synecdoche, irony, are used by the historian Hayden White to analyze historical explanation or emplotment, as he calls it. They are the basic rhetorical structures by which we make sense of experience. The fundamental idea of rhetoric as a discipline, which comes out well in this fourfold example, is that there are basic structures of language which underlie and make possible the meanings produced in a wide variety of discourses. Genres. Many theorists of genre have followed the Greeks, who divided works among three broad classes according to who speaks: poetic or lyric, where the narrator speaks in the first person; epic or narrative, where the narrator speaks in his own voice but allows characters to speak in theirs; and drama, where the characters do all the talking. Another way of making this distinction is to focus on the relation of speaker to audience. In epic, there is oral recitation, a poet directly confronting the listening audience. In drama, the author is concealed from the audience and the characters on stage talk. In lyric, the most complicated case, the poet, in singing or chanting, turns his back on his listeners, so to speak, and pretends to be talking to himself or to someone else, a spirit of nature, a muse, a personal friend, a lover, a god, a personified abstraction, or a natural object. To these three elementary genres, we can add the modern genre of a novel, which addresses the reader through a book. Poetry as word and act. A poem is both a structure made of words, a text, an event, an act of the poet, an experience of the reader, an event in literary history. For the poem as act, a key question has been the relation between the act of the author who writes the poem and that of the speaker or voice that speaks there. The author does not speak the poem. To write it, the author imagines him or herself or another voice speaking it. The rhythmical pattern and the rhyme scheme flaunt the organization of this piece of language and can both provoke special interpretive attention and suspend inquiry. Poetry has its own order, which gives pleasure, so there is no need to ask about meaning. The rhythmical organization lets language get under the guard of intelligence and lodge itself in mechanical memory. Recent conceptions of poems as intertextual constructions stress that poems are energized by echoes of past poems, echoes which they may not master. Unity becomes less a property of poems than something interpreters seek, whether they look for harmonious fusion or unresolved tension. To do this, readers identify oppositions in the poem and see how other elements of the poem, particularly figurative expressions, align themselves with these oppositions.